There is an alarming trend in the US and the UK that is directly tied into events that will befall these countries in the end time. I came across an article this week. Let me quote from it. It says more than half in the UK are non-religious. For the first time, more than half of the people in the UK do not identify as religious. A survey suggests that last year, 53% of people described themselves as having no religion. Among those aged between 18 and 25, the proportion was higher at 71%. So we can see the direction of the trend. And as these people become older, how this will become more prevalent. This downward trend for religious belief in the UK is happening in the US as well. And one article that I also came across this week, it says this quote-unquote Christian majority that shaped the nation's history had dropped below 50%. So church attendance in the U.S. is, according to Wikipedia, down to 47%, and even worse yet in the U.K., where it's an appalling 20% in the terms of people who regularly attend church services. So at this point in time, most of the people in these nations are not religious. We can no longer consider ourselves a predominantly Christian nation. Religion is becoming less and less of a relevant factor in people's lives. Now, why is this a problem? Well, specifically, there are prophecies in the Bible that relate to the time that we are in, this time just before the return of Christ. Let me read to you from Leviticus 26, and we'll go over some of these prophecies. In Leviticus 26, verses 1 through 3, it says, beginning in verse 1, you shall not make idols for yourselves. And then verse 2, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. And then verse 3, it says, if you walk in these statutes, commandments, judgments, etc., and perform them, then verse 4, what will happen? I will give you rain in its season. The land yields produce. The trees will yield fruit. And then verse 6, I will give you peace in the land. You shall lie down. None shall make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through the land. These are the promises from God that he gives to us if we obey him. If we do not put idols in his place or before him, and anything can be an idol as long as it comes before God. It doesn't have to just be these little graven images or statues. And also he says to keep his Sabbath. This is important to God that we do this in order that he is able to bless us with these things he says. Now, the converse is true. If we pick it up in verse 14, it says, but if you do not obey me, do not observe all these commandments, okay? Not only the idolatry of the Sabbath keeping, but all the rest of these. If you despise the statutes then and the judgments, and you do not perform the commandments, then cursings will come upon you. And notice what some of them are here in verse 16. It says, I also will do this to you if you break these commandments. I will even appoint terror over you. Okay? Think about what's going on now and what has even happened in the past. You know, we're concerned about North Korea and the attack that they're going to have. We are concerned about ISIS and any radical Islamists in the nation. And for good reason, because they have already attacked 9/11, which is coming up here on this next Monday, the anniversary of this terror attack that happened on the country. Is this a coincidence that this has happened as the nation that we are now living in becomes less religious? No, it's not. If you believe that this is the Word of God, that God's in charge, that God is making prophecy come about, then you must believe that there is a direct correlation between the church attendance that's going on in these nations. And again, it has to be true church attendance and to be following the Bible fully and correctly as well. It cannot just be an image or superficially. And then notice in verse 17, it says, well, continue verse 16, it says, I'll appoint terror over you, wasting disease, fever. He says, you'll sow your seed in your vein and your enemies will eat it. Now, we're not exactly to that point yet, but if this trend continues as it has been continuing over the last decade or more, then these things will come about. In verse 17, he says, I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies. Again, hard to believe that the mighty great nations of the UK and the US can and will be defeated for this reason. So as we look about at what we should be doing, again, we should continue to go to church, to go to the true church of God, and to, if we want to avoid these physical cursings that can and will come upon us, then we need to change our way of life, and especially if we want to be in his kingdom. Matthew 19:17 says, if you will enter into life, keep my commandments, all of them. So now, brethren, as we see these signs of the times coming about, it is imperative that we turn to God.